Let's talk draft comps in this class, and we're going to start with a guy that we somehow haven't spent a lot of time talking about, Jalen Milroe, the quarterback out of Alabama. Part of me, Rand, wanted him to come back for another year just to see what that would look like with Kalen DeBoer, because we saw what Kalen DeBoer and Michael Penix Jr. were able to do together at Washington, and it ended up with Michael Penix Jr. going from, well, he was considered a much more athletic quarterback at Indiana to a guy who was a pocket passer who could absolutely spin it by the time he left Washington. Jalen Milroe was, for being honest, up and down at Alabama this year. The game against Georgia was lights out, and then there were moments where you wanted to see a little bit more consistency, especially on those second-level throws. But let's start here. What is your comp for Jalen Milroe? And let's have a conversation about where he may end up going once the draft happens.
So here I went kind of two comps. So if we're looking at Milroe as just a pure quarterback, my comp for him was Malik Willis. And if you're looking for a comp for a guy that's so dynamic, so explosive with the ball in his hands, I went with Taysom Hill. And we can get into that, a little bit, if you want. How we can justify both of those.
Absolutely. So let's start with that. So here's the thing. Jalen Milroe, for me, if you're talking about a pure pocket passer and stacking him in this draft class, I have those concerns, but the athleticism is what jumps out at you. And we were talking to a couple of the Texas A&M edge rushers, Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart, and they both said to a person that Jalen was the toughest quarterback they faced, in part because of his ability with the ball in his hands to run. I mentioned it to Jalen, and Jalen said, I can also throw the ball. I said, yeah, I probably should have thought about that before I said it out loud. But you're right, you can throw the ball. But in terms of if you're stacking them with the Cam Wards, George Sanders, Jackson Darts, Kyle McCords, Quinn Ewers, Tyler Shucks of the world, he's not as consistent a passer of the football down the field. So how do you reconcile that when you're in the draft room trying to figure out where you're going to take him?
I mean, again, the number one thing, and he was for a while, in the fall, he was my QB3. But he was so, and you saw his deficiencies, in the passing game, all the things that you mentioned. You were worried about the hand size, because there were times where you're watching him throw the ball and it looks like he's palming it because of the hand size. But again, the ball jumps off his hand. But it was the accuracy issues were an issue for me. But he was so dynamic and so explosive, with the ball in his hand. His acceleration, where he can just hit a crease was like nothing I've ever seen, at the quarterback position in a while. So, comparing him to Malik Willis, the deficiencies I felt were the same. I think both guys were athletic. I think they both had live arms and could throw the ball all over the yard. But the quick processing was a step off. And what I've learned is, with quarterbacks who have a live arm, they could be a little late because they can drive the ball and squeeze the ball into those tight windows, whereas guys who have lesser arm strength has to be a little bit more anticipatory. So that was my comp, for him. And Malik went third round, I believe. And there's a space where, Jalen is a day two quarterback. And then my other comp for him was a guy, Taysom Hill, who – another guy that's athletic that can do a bunch of things with the ball in his hand. And that lends to, Jalen's dynamic ability with the ball in his hands, the explosiveness, the speed, the ability to hit a home run. And in today's game, I'm pretty sure you're not going to have a guy with this type of ability just sitting on the sideline. You're going to find a way to work him into a lineup, a package. And there's a scenario where, he's a part of a quarterback room where he may not be the starter. He's the number two, and then they have a real guy as the number three. That way you can work him into packages without having to force him in the game as your number three, and the other guys have a chance to not re-enter.
I love all that. And in theory, I can buy all that. But what if you're sitting on a 30 visit or the combine interview and Jalen says, I'm a quarterback. I don't want to be doing all this trick play stuff that you guys are trying to scheme up for me?
Well, then again, it depends on who your QB1 is and what your offense looks like. And so and quarterbacks have stated that, if I'm not mistaken. I think same thing came up with Tim Tebow, where he, I'm a quarterback. This is what I want to do. And, a team still took a chance on him. And then, we saw what it was by the end. He was in Jacksonville, I think, trying out as a tight end, in the end. Again, I expect Jalen to want to be a quarterback, but I also expect Jalen to want to play football, which would give him the best chance to play football. And then there's a scenario where he could be used in a Justin Fields type package, where you're still the backup quarterback, You still have a chance to play and throw the ball, but we just want to put you in some packages, get you out there, get the defense off balance. And, I mean, this guy, he's catching steam, as we head into these last couple of days of the draft. I want to say he's had 430 visits and as many private workouts, scheduled. And he got an invite to Green Bay, and they don't throw those around easily. So there's a reason why he's got an invite to Green Bay, because the buzz is building around him to be picked fairly early.
Our buddy Jonathan Jones, our NFL insider here at CBS Sports, said Milroe could be the QB3. He talked about that. He reported that on CBS Sports HQ. And JJ was the only media person that I know on planet Earth, maybe somewhere else, some other planet in the galaxy. But he had Michael Penix Jr. going to the Atlanta Falcons last year in the one and only mock draft that he did, and he absolutely nailed that. No surprise, he caught a lot of pushback from folks on social media and whatnot, but that was exactly right. So knowing all that, I'm going to ask you this question. So let's say a team like the Giants need a quarterback at the top of the second round, and your choice is between Jalen Milroe and let's say Jackson Dart is there, just because he's QB3 for most folks. And you can run whatever offense you want to run, but you know that you have Russ Wilson, you know that you have Jameis Winston. Who makes the most sense if you're trying to build a team to win in the next couple of years?
Well, I think if we're using the Giants example, specifically, I think Jackson Dart is more of a fit there for Dayball's system, where there's some design run opportunities, and Jackson Dart is athletic in his own right and can pull the ball down and get positive yards when there's green grass ahead. But I think with what Dayball wants to do, just in terms of reading coverages, manipulating safeties, I think that's more so Jackson Dart's game, and he would be a better fit, for the Giants if they were picking early in 2, and you had to choose between those two guys.
Okay, no, that's interesting. I'm glad you added the qualification about what Brian Dibble likes to do. Is there a situation where you think Jalen Milroe, a team that makes the most sense if we're talking about this second round range, early day 2 range?
I mean, if we're looking at it, you got to think about the teams that are picking on the back end, of the draft, of the first round rather. Those earlier teams.
So let's see here. I'll tell you who we got here. Now, after pick 21, that's the Steelers, so everyone knows that by now, because it feels like after that they're wide open. It sounds like Sean McVay said he hasn't even watched the quarterbacks. I don't know if he's just joking around, but it sounds like they're happy with Matthew Stafford and Stetson Bennett and Jimmy G for now. So maybe they'd circle back on day 2 or day 3, but I don't think the first round is going to be a consideration for them. And then after that, everyone has a quarterback. At the top of the second, it's Cleveland, the Giants, Titans, Jags, and then Vegas at 37. I don't know if you want to do that to Geno just yet. And then at 40, you have the Saints. Now, you mentioned Taysom Hill. Is that a situation where you might thinking about doubling down on a Taysom Hill type player behind Derek Carr?
No, I would say not, just because, Taysom Hill has been – he started off because I'm just going back to 2017. He was in Green Bay in the preseason, and he played strictly quarterback, right? And I'm pretty certain that only Sean Payton had the vision for Taysom Hill that he had, right? Because he was a 4-4 guy, coming out of BYU. And so they claimed him at the deadline, if I'm not mistaken, and then that role evolved. And the head coaches that have come through there kind of just stuck with it. Well, Kellen Moore is coming in with his own offense, that's a little bit different from what's been run in the past. And so I would say no there. I would probably say, just going back to those teams, at the top, I could see a scenario where he fits at the Raiders, right? For that same reason we mentioned, like they just gave Geno an extension, and Geno is going to be the QB1. However, you got to have a plan, for the future. And Pete Carroll being a former defensive coordinator, why not have a quarterback that can keep people up at night with their ability to run? So I could see a fit there at the Raiders in the top of 2.
No, that's a good call, too. And Chip Kelly, the new offensive coordinator there, has experience with getting the most out of athletic quarterbacks for sure. This is going to be interesting because there's so much to like about Jalen Milroe, and he's a great kid. I think academically he excels at Alabama, and then, he's great in the community. It was just you want to see him make those improvements basically on just the intermediate throws. We know he can throw the ball out of the out of the building because everything else he does at a high level. You mentioned the hand size. He's 6'1". I don't know how much the 6'1" bothers me. Maybe the hand size does if you're playing in cold weather. But I'll just ask you this one thing, and then we'll move on. Percentage that he's a day 2. It feels like it's pretty high, given the direction we're going here.
No, I think it's a high percentage. Because again, and you have to take the whole picture. Have to bring the whole picture into focus. Everyone's pretty certain of who's going number 1 and how that's going to shake out. But then now the question is, where does Shedeur Sanders land,
right?
And where and how far down? And so we don't know where that's going to go. And so that could push the position down a little bit further, which brings a guy into day 2, which is where you're going to have the conversation if Jackson Dart is still there, if Tyler Shuck is still there, or Jalen Milroe. So I think those 3 guys in particular, I think it's all dependent on where Shedeur Sanders lands and then where we see the run on quarterbacks.
Yep. No, I think that's right. But that's great. That's good stuff on Jalen because we have not, oddly enough, talked a lot about him, even though he was one of the best players in college football a year ago, and just felt like once we got out of the Senior Bowl run where he was okay. He didn't blow anyone's hair back that week. He didn't have a bad week, but I know I'd heard he was frustrated with how he had practiced, and I get all that as well. And it felt like things started to fizzle a little bit for them. So the arrow is now pointing up on Jalen again. You talked about the 30 visits, and he's going to be at the draft in Green Bay. So it certainly sounds like his name's going to get called sooner rather than later. And if he gets in the right situation, watch out because I think he has a chance to be a really good player. He's just got to, once he gets those intermediate throws in terms of more consistency, then it's going to be go time for sure.
And let's finish here with Jalen.
Yeah.
2 things. At his pro day, he wasn't scheduled to run a 40, and he got coached into running a 40. And depending on which teams and which scouts you talk to, it was anywhere from 4.41 to 4.46. And so that's a thing. And then
that is a thing.
That is a real thing. And then just in terms of him, in terms of his throwing ability, I want to say he's had 3 OCs at Alabama. There's been constant change there. So we're not sure on what he's been asked to do and
that's
how
true.
long he's consistently been able to work on these things. And maybe that's what's swaying teams now that he's in there on these 30 visits and they're getting a chance to see him and hear him and how he processes these different things and all the systems that he's seen. And maybe that's what's starting to catch teams' eye.
Yeah, and that's an important point because a lot of times fans get frustrated with why are guys gaining late buzz. Well, first of all, it's not like everyone's coming to these players at the same time on an NFL staff. I mean, there are guys that are coaching football until January sometimes, and then the scouts have known these kids forever. And then sometimes you don't get these kids until late. I mean, there might be a situation where you're not in the Senior Bowl interviews because you're not there yet, and maybe you see them at the combine, maybe you don't. Then the 30 visits and everyone. At this point, 13 days out, have we buttoned up everything we want to button up in terms of the draft meetings and big board for NFL teams, or is there still loose ends to tie up?
No, the front board, as you would call it, which is probably usually your top, 150 or so. I'm pretty sure that's pretty buttoned up.
Okay.
At this point, right now, you're probably working on some back end free agent types as you're stacking the list with the coaches and with the scouts and guys that you want to target there. So there's some teams that are wrapping up 30 visits, this week. I know some private workouts will carry into next week. There are some positions and some guys who I know in particular are having some private workouts next week. So they'll get those done, but pretty much your front board should be about wrapped up.